Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Hello, I'm Sandy McCann, and I'm very happy to be here today in the home of Betty and Charlie Roper, our honorary chairs for the 60th anniversary celebration of St. Thomas Episcopal Church.
And we are most grateful and happy to serve.
Charlie is one who's been so instrumental and important in my own spiritual journey. I am delighted to walk down memory lane a little bit with you today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
St. Thomas was relatively new when you were called here. What did you see as your gifts that were going to be able to help them with their needs and their opportunities when you arrived?
Well, when I was visited by the committee at Holy Cross, where I was previously serving, they sat in my office for an hour and a half, and the little car boy sat on my lap the whole time while they were there. And we talked about what they needed, and they were impressed with the fact that I had been a counselor at the not the Pastoral Institute, but I had been a counselor at the Georgian Clinic, and that I had been working with reconciliation in the community very hard because the people from Atlanta who had been displaced by the integration of I-85 and I-75 put in next to the Grady Hospital, they'd all moved out in our direction, so there was conflict of income, conflict of race, conflict of culture, and it was my job to put 5 churches together and call ourselves Columbia Crossways and do reconciliation. And their impression said, come, we need some reconciliation. And in my letter I wrote, if you want the best years of my life, then call me and I'll come.
Well, we're certainly glad you did come. During your time with us, what did you perceive as the gifts of the parish?
Well, my first impression when we gathered in a then parish hall and began to talk about what the parish needed to be, I was a great one for pulling everybody together and having a council so that we could talk about the history and where we were and what we wanted to do as a parish. And I remember being there and seeing that the congregation was very faithful to the ministry of others up front. There was an organization that was there that was very helpful. I believe it was called Wilkins House, and that had been an act of mission previous to my coming, and it was mine to bless with somebody else's activity.
One other thing, and you were talking about your legacy of dedicating that place to God and always being aware of it. Out of that came several ministries and ministers, and maybe you could speak to that.
Well, strangely enough, when I stand in the pulpit and preach, I never know what's coming out sometimes. And whatever came out, I've had several people come to me and said, I think I'd like to go into the priesthood. And over my life, there have been 18 people whom I sponsored to go into the priesthood, and over half of those have been women. And the great pride of my life is that Sandy McCann and Martin said they had listened to me long enough and they were going to do it. So they retired early and took off and went to Tanzania for 10 years, and that place is thriving as a result of their ministry. I had a little bit to do with that, because Sandy said to me, I enjoy your sermons, but I can't hear you from the back. I said, well, then move up front. And she did. And every time I got in the pulpit, there she was, looking straight at me. But that's such a wonderful ministry. And it's probably the highlight of all those in my life who chose to go into the ministry from some influence that I might have had in their lives.
Charlie, you were very involved with adult education and ministry when you were there. But I remember my daughters talking about you teaching their confirmation class and their first communion classes when we had that. Tell us more about your work with youth.
Well, I've always thought that you've got to be present in a very kind and supportive way to young people. And this is one event. I stayed on top of it all the time as much as I could and had responsible leaders for the youth. But mostly when I get tired of the fact that they weren't doing the job, I just say, well, let me do it for a while, and we did. And that happened towards the end of my ministry at St. Thomas, when it just wasn't going well at all, and the kids didn't have any fun. And we had our new building, so I said, let's meet in front of the fireplace in the new building. And we talked, and next thing you know, I said, there's a program at St. John the Divine in New York City where you have a weekend to enjoy being in the cathedral, take your own food, but you can sleep on the floor in the gymnasium. And we went up, and I had a personal relationship with Madeline Lingle, the great author and the librarian of St. John the Divine. And I called and said, would you be with my young people for an hour if they all read a book and you can discuss it with them? And she said, absolutely. So I took all the youth that would go, and we went up to sit in her library, and she talked about A Wrinkle in Time. And the children were overwhelmed.
Charlie, I remember one important event that we haven't discussed yet was when the Archbishop of Canterbury came to our church. Can you tell us what he did when he came here?
Yes. There was a convocation meeting for Bishop Sims, who brought the Archbishop over to talk to our congregations and give us a sense of world church. Between our dinner and the time the Archbishop was to address the members of the convocation, I asked him if he would bless St. Thomas Church, and he said, certainly. So we walked up and opened the doors, and he stepped in and looked at the words above the altar and said, oh, the words of Blessed Thomas, the words of Blessed Thomas. And he walked in, and about 12, 14 pews up, he said, I'd like to think for a minute before I pray. Be quiet with me. And he put his hand on the pew, and in a little bit, he made the most beautiful prayer, which I immediately went in and recorded in my office so that we could calligraphy that and put it on the wall, and then put a plaque on where he stood. But I've always thought that was such a grand thing that the Archbishop of Canterbury blessed the St. Thomas Church, and it remains blessed.
Tell us about some of the other projects that you were involved in while in Columbus. We know you helped start several ministries and other projects that we're still participating in. So maybe you can fill us in the background. I know you were president of Kiwanis, and you got us involved in the city in a big way and even in the world.
Well, to list it very briefly, I'm most impressed with the development of Chattahoochee Valley Episcopal Ministry. I think that's the crowning glory of what I had to do in trying to get us to outreach. And it came by way of asking the parishes if there were not a better way to do mission when all of us were doing different ones. Why could we not combine it and put our strengths together to make one good ministry to the neighborhood? And as it turned out, it was good. And we met for 2 years, once a month, to make plans to pull the parishes together to get the strength enough to do what CVM is doing right now. And I was very proud of that, and super proud of Vicki Parton for what she has done in her life.
And what about Young Life? Were you involved in that?
Yes, I was. Young Life was a thing next to my heart because I'm convinced that the world really needs to know how to walk with Jesus without it being the repugnance of hostile kind of evangelism that so much is practiced, and that is a very pleasant way. And we developed that and supported it, and enjoyed very much having 2 of my children very active and speaking witness to that. And I think it's still operating, but I'm not sure.
Oh yes, it is. Going strong. Well, we need to wrap this up, Charlie. So I want to give you a chance to, first of all, I want to say how much St. Thomas has appreciated you and Betty and what you did for us and the time you spent with us. Is there any other thing that you would add, something that you feel is your greatest legacy?
Greatest legacy? Now that's really something. And somebody asked me recently, that is the current rector, what made Thomas so special. And I said, when I walked in, I said, Lord, this property is yours. These buildings are yours, and they will remain so, and I will defend that, and we will not walk away from the Spirit. And I discovered that the first time we came through Holy Week, we came to Holy Saturday, and I said, I got to do something special for this parish on that day. So I initiated taking holy water and walking the perimeter of the parish and dedicating that parish over and over and over again every year on Holy Saturday. And I had a crucifer walk in front of me, and I'd always laugh in the back of my head because I'm sure the neighbors wondered what in the world we were doing shaking the water and following a cross around the whole perimeter of the property. But it seems to have had some effect in the dedication of the place, and I think as long as St. Thomas holds that property to be dedicated to the Lord and to find his service from that spot as a springboard, I think that'll continue to be one of my good memories.
Well, thank you. We are so grateful. And all the best to you and Betty and your remaining years and time.
Thank you kindly. You're very generous.
Lord Jesus, stay with us, for evening is at hand and the day is past. Be our companion in the way, kindle our hearts and awaken hope, that we may know Thee as Thou art revealed in the Scripture and in the breaking of bread. Grant this for the sake of Thy love,